everyone. Today I am super excited to have the wonderful Chef Kibby joining me. Chef has over 25 years of food experience and 16 years as a biological, foster, and adoptive dad. Chef Kibby offers a unique and practical perspective on how parents and caregivers can support the mental and emotional development of their children by understanding the hunger for connection and harnessing the inherent trust of cooking and eating together. You can listen to the Hunger for Connection podcast and visit chefkibby.com for resources and information on his public speaking. I am super excited for him to be here today and talk more about his movement. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to this episode of Attachment Theory in Action. I am very excited to have Chef Kibby join us today. I am excited about this topic that we're going to talk about. This was actually something that's pretty new to my ears in terms of bringing attachment and relationships and food together. So I am really excited for you to be able to share this with our listeners, share some of your story and some of the amazing work that you've been doing. So welcome.
Thank you for allowing me to be on the podcast with you. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I always like to start my podcast with a very similar question for my guests. And that is, attachment and the development of attachment happens early in life. We know that all of our early experiences can have a lifelong impact on us. And so my question to you is, was there anything that led you down this road to starting I want to call it a movement, this kind of movement into hungry for connection. What led you to this place you're in today?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll keep it short. The two things that kind of came together when it comes to addressing the hunger for connection is, first of all, my culinary experience. I am a professional chef. I've been in the industry for almost 30 years now. Started out when I was in high school, just waiting tables and doing that sort of thing. And then eventually becoming a certified chef, becoming a culinary instructor, having my own business. I had my own catering business up until, April of 2020 when a little thing called COVID happened. Um, I'm still involved in food service, but that definitely put a pause on things for a moment. And it was actually during that time that this movement began for me, because at that same time, I was also in the middle of my foster and adoptive parenting journey. My wife and I became licensed foster parents probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And we had been doing this for a while by the time COVID happened, and we're struggling with it. I was struggling with it. I um, had a hard time understanding how to meet the needs of the children that had been placed into our home. I thought that all that they needed was a roof over their head and food on the table and consistent discipline and expectations, and that everything would be fine and dandy. And of course, they weren't. And rather than thinking that maybe I needed to change my approach, or there was something that I was doing that wasn't working, I just kind of escaped into that work that I was doing as a chef and as someone who had an event space and a catering business. And that got taken away from me when COVID happened. And so it was when those two things collided, if you will, the food and the trauma-informed parenting, when I began to get serious about it and look at the issues that we were dealing with, I began to realize that these two parts of my life were not nearly as disconnected as I may have thought. And in fact, the two very much go hand in hand. And that's kind of the impetus behind this, the beginning of my journey.
Thank you for sharing your story. I want to highlight a couple of the things that you said because, your understanding of what these children needed, that's a very common understanding. If you aren't exposed to the world of attachment and trauma and what can happen to a child's ability to make and have healthy relationships, often we do think, well, I'm going to give them a safe place to live, a physically safe place to live. They have a roof over their head, they have food, they have consistency. Um, and we often, I think there's a book, when love is not enough. We think that we're providing love for a child, and it doesn't seem to help. And so I just want to, for our listeners who aren't clinicians in the field, for example, who maybe are foster parents or even adoptive parents who are having some of those thoughts, like why isn't this working? That is very normal, and that it takes quite a journey of acceptance and then understanding to be able to kind of be like, okay, now I get why love isn't quite enough. So I appreciate you kind of being vulnerable. And I know in one of our previous conversations in preparation for this, you had shared that, you couldn't hide from that struggle that you were having anymore because COVID forced you inside, right? Away from your work. Would you still agree that that was true?
Definitely, it was. And it was in that time that I had to face the facts. Like either we're going to continue to struggle and this is going to continue to be a battle in our home, or I'm going to get some help and I'm going to figure out what we're doing wrong, what we're doing right, what we can do differently. And it was in that time of, really digging into the science of trauma-informed care, learning about things like TBRI and authors like Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Kurt Thompson and others that I began to have my eyes opened to what the true issues were, while at the same time making the connection between the relational difficulties that I was having with my child and perhaps the relational difficulties my child was having with me, and to be able to connect that to this idea of hunger, that hunger is this experience that we have that sometimes brings us closer in relationship, but oftentimes when that hunger gets too big, it drives us further apart. And when I began to attach that same language, the language that I'd always known as a chef and someone who's been involved in food, to be able to connect that language to these relational difficulties that we were having with with parenting and with attitudes and behaviors that didn't seem to make sense in the moment, it opened my eyes to a new realm of understanding of kids from hard places and of being able to find empathy and compassion for them that has again just opened up new opportunities for me to be more present and attuned to my child's needs and to actually help them and myself in becoming more deeply connected.
I mean, I don't know if you realized, but when we had our first conversation afterwards, I was just like kind of mind blown that this metaphor had not come to light before, because it really does make so much sense. And I mean, one of the first things that I think about when you use that phrase, hungry for connection, and the use of the same language as we would for food, like, to me, the need of hunger is an innate need. Like, it is within us to survive. And that is the exact same thing for connection. Like, we are social creatures, and it is, so many times I hear that, oh, they're just choosing to behave this way, like they're making a choice. But actually, it's their need, this innate need for connection and emotional responsiveness from another person, that is driving those behaviors, whether they're positive or negative behaviors. It's the same need underneath of it. Um, so, I mean, tell me a little bit more about hungry for connection. What are some other parallels that you have found helped you to understand the needs that those kids have?
Sure. Well, the hunger for connection at its base framework is this idea that we have a need for peace, or we have an innate desire for peace. And I think that's what you were already hitting at just a moment ago. We want peace. Peace is something that is necessary for us to survive, to thrive, to be resilient. And that peace is something that we long for and desire in all of our realms of relationship. And I've identified four realms of relationship. That's the relationship with our own body, which is the first and primary relationship. Then there's a relationship with other people, the immediate vicinity, typically primary caregivers being those first relationships. And then we have a relationship with our outer environment. And then we have the relationship um, with kind of a future sense of hope, with a longing for peace to remain in our lives on into the future. Now, if we put this in the terminology of interpersonal neurobiology, like those guys I was mentioning earlier with all the letters behind their names, they would talk about the four psychological needs of being soothed, seen, safe, and secure. So soothed is to have peace in relationship to our body. To be seen is to have peace with other people. To be safe is to be at peace with our environment. And then to be secure is to have this sense that I'm going to continue to be soothed, seen, and safe on into the future. Now, all of that, to me, ties back to this idea of hunger, that these sensations of peace, that these relationships we have with these different realms all come back to this idea, the same idea that, like you had mentioned, is just so natural to all of us. We innately understand hunger. But when you stop and like think about what hunger actually is, I describe it as the four Ds. So another set of four. Um, we have a discomfort, that's that feeling that you get in your body. And that discomfort is a result of a deficiency. There's something missing that I need to get from someone or something else. And that deficiency comes from the body and is communicated up to the brain so that the brain can decipher that message and then decide what to do about it. Now that is just as true for our sensation of hunger. Like, it's getting to be that time in the afternoon when we got to start thinking about dinner. There's a discomfort that we feel in our body. There's a deficiency, that there's something missing that our body needs. And we, as fully connected human beings, as grown adults, understand what our body is communicating to us so that we can decide, hey, I'm going to make a sandwich or order some pizza or whatever the case may be. The same thing happens with other realms of relationship and other types of discomfort that we feel. Like, instead of hunger, think of anxiety, think of worry, think of fear, think of loneliness. All of those, all of those emotional types of discomfort that we feel express themselves as a discomfort in our body, that there's a deficiency of something, and I need to decipher what this deficiency is so I can decide what to do next. And when we put it in those terms, all of a sudden it's like a light bulb hits me. It's like, wow, that's a type of hunger, right?
Mm-hmm. 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 And it really does. I feel like this is such a great explanation that for so many, again, who are not in like the clinical field, can really wrap their heads around. Like, well, of course it makes sense. If I'm hungry for food, I go through those 4D steps, right? And at the end, I make this decision and I go and I cook something for dinner. And then I think about, what happens when something gets in the way of those steps. And so for our kids, it's that trauma. But if we go back to the food analogy, like if something gets in the way, like, oh, I'm running late, or I have to go here, there, or somewhere else before I can make dinner. And then we run to the store and we buy all the things that we shouldn't buy, or we eat something that's not as healthy for us. And so the need disrupts, sometimes the need or other external pieces can disrupt our deciphering of what's going on, and then causes us to behave in ways that aren't always the best for us, right? We choose ice cream for dinner or a candy bar instead of cooking a proper meal. And so I just feel like that is just so in line with exactly what we see in our children. And if we can understand that, then our responses. So tell me a bit when you had this kind of enlightening experience. How did you find your responses change to the children who were in your care, or even other children that you may have been working with?
It allowed me to access a sense of empathy and compassion that did not exist in me before. Because, I mean, let's face it, I came from a pretty common, Midwest upbringing. I didn't have a whole lot of trauma in my life. So I didn't understand what it was like to be separated from my family of origin from a young age, to be taken from everything that I know and everyone I know, whether good, bad, right, wrong, or indifferent, to be taken from those people, from those places, from those experiences, and taken somewhere else, even for the best of reasons, that creates a disconnect that I didn't understand. And I didn't understand how much that would impact their ability to receive my love, to receive my compassionate caregiving. I couldn't empathize. But when I changed the language to hunger, then I had something I could latch onto because I know how difficult things can be for me when I get hungry, when I have a discomfort that is riding in the back of my head that is now coloring the way that I'm experiencing my own body, the way I'm experiencing other people, the way I'm experiencing my environment, and the way I'm experiencing my sense of how things are going to be in the future. And when I made that connection, it's like, okay, this child isn't just being defiant or disobedient or disrespectful. They're being defensive. They're they're scared. They're hungry. They have a need that they don't even know how to express. They may not even understand it themselves. And as much as their lack of peace creates a lack of peace in me and in my home and in my family, I have to take a step back and be curious and wonder what is the hunger that needs to be fed in this child, not the attitude that needs to be fixed, not the behavior that needs to be fixed. What is the hunger that needs to be fed? Then we can actually be in relationship rather than just butting heads.
Mm. I love that. I mean, I feel like we just need to kind of sit with that for a second and just
Hmm.
because I don't think we sit with that for long enough. Everyone wants solutions, everyone wants a quick fix. Um, and it's not, I mean, you can speak from your own experience. It didn't happen overnight, right? Like, even though you knew this, okay, now I've realized it just doesn't happen overnight. And you have to keep returning to reminding yourself that they're not just being defiant. They're not just, trying to push my buttons, that they have this need, and had their early life experiences been different, then they wouldn't have so much of those needs. They may still have moments here and there, but they would have been, satisfied. Those needs would have been more satisfied. Um, and I don't think we sit with that for long enough.
It's hard to sit with that for very long because it puts us in a place where we get uncomfortable with it, right? Because there's two things at work. There's their own discomfort that they're trying to deal with, and then there's the discomfort that it creates in us because, I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure there's someone listening to the sound of our voice thinking, I'm loving this child. I am caring for this child as best as I know how, and still they push back and refuse to listen, refuse to obey, refuse to accept the things that are actually going to make them happy and healthy and bring them joy. And it can be debilitating. It can be embarrassing. We begin to second guess ourselves. Like, did I make a bad choice in becoming a foster parent or an adoptive parent? And the answer is no, you didn't. That doesn't mean it's not hard. And the hardness I understand now is because there is no connection. There is no relational, physiological attachment that this child has to you, nor you to that child. those things have to be built, and it takes putting in the reps. And thankfully, we have an opportunity each and every day, whenever we are in the process of feeding them, to actually utilize the same mechanism, the same neurobiological mechanism that we use to connect with our newborn infant, to connect with this child that has been placed into our home, and to use it not just as a way of feeding their bodies, but to feed the relationship, to feed the relational connection we have with that child. And that could be very comforting to those of us, again, like you were saying earlier, that don't have a background in, trauma-informed care or interpersonal neurobiology or all these fancy terms. We just want to love these kids.
Mhm. Well, and I think I f- I feel like kind of some of what you're highlighting on is in our previous conversation, and I had written this down in my notes, like the kitchen is the heart of the home. And we this isn't just about all that scientific stuff. It's about the literal, like, what does meeting that need of not connection this time, but food, what does that help us create in a child, and because as an infant, you are solely reliant on somebody else to sustain you, to, ensure that you survive. And so for those of us who had the privilege of a healthy and safe upbringing, food is something that most of the time brings you joy. And so how can we maybe use that to create new experiences for our children who didn't have those, didn't get that innate primal need met? And kind of what I feel like I hear you saying is that there's like two bonuses to this. Not only are you building connection, but you're also helping them have new experiences with food that would often be maybe traumatizing for them or triggering.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just because they've come into care doesn't mean they necessarily had, food deprivation or neglect of that sort. But we can see, and I think the science is proving this out, that even if they did not have a bad relationship with food, that their current relationship with food can still be impacted by the fact that they've been, again, separated from their family of origin and may have experienced neglect or abuse in other areas of their life. Food is very intimate. It is
Hmm.
very personal. It impacts every single part of us. Like our entire nervous system has, in some way, shape, or form, a connection to food, whether it be our drive for food and for nourishment, or our experience of actually eating it, or the feelings that we get after we've consumed it. So this whole process of becoming hungry and being satisfied by food is a deeply embodied experience um, that we often take for granted, how personal it can be and how deeply impactful it can be, and how much any sort of a sense of not having peace in any of our realms of relationship can impact the relationship we have with food, and which is why we see a lot of children in care either, you know, binging on food or hoarding food or stealing food or hiding food or even being picky about the types of things that they eat. All of those things may be food related, but it also may just be attachment related as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and also even quite simply a need for having some control in my life, something that I can be in control of.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I think I haven't personally experienced it, but hearing stories from foster parents or adoptive parents who do often encounter children that have food related challenges, like you just mentioned, and how instead of seeing it as a barrier and a source of further disconnection, trying to find ways for connection instead. Um, one of the I kind of want to pull our conversation back a second to um the idea of when love is not enough, and
Mm.
how in our previous conversation you and I talked about when you're trying food for the first time. Do you remember that? Do you want to
Mm.
maybe share this kind of analogy, this parallel that occurs that you described to me?
Yeah,
If
I
you
can
can remember
recall.
it.
Yeah, I mean, there's many different directions we can go with this, but I will say that trying food for the first time, it can be it can be very scary. It can be very nerve-wracking. And I even run into people, in my experience as a chef who, have very strong feelings, negative feelings towards certain foods. And oftentimes it's tied to a bad experience that they had, early in childhood. I mean, for me personally, for the longest time, I had a, a very deep gut reaction to the thought of eating beets because one of my earliest childhood memories was of my parents feeding me pickled red beets from a can. And I hated them. I absolutely loathed them. They were the thing that, if you asked my parents what is the one thing that I hated the most, it was beets. And yet somehow I now love beets. In fact, I love them so much that I actually grow my own. And that's weird. That's not, you wouldn't think that that's normal. But what happened was, at one point later on in life, when I was training to become a professional chef, I was working at a restaurant. I was in a comfortable environment in which I was put at peace. I was with people that I trusted and I knew were there to help me, to grow in my knowledge and understanding of food that taught me that, first of all, beets didn't have to come from a can, that they could actually be bought fresh, and that you can roast them with the skin on, by the way, because it helps to concentrate the sugars. Roasting them skin on, and then peeling them and dicing them, and then tossing them in a salad. And I found them to be absolutely delicious at that point. Now, you couldn't take the childhood me and then put me right into you know, that circumstance and necessarily expect the same results. There's a series of events that have to take place, and sometimes it doesn't happen the first time. Sometimes it has to happen several times over because there's so much else going on in our brains and in our bodies that dictate how we're going to respond to food. It's it's the environment. It's how much sleep we've had that day. It's the other smells in the room. It's the people that we're with. It's what's been going on in my life the last few days. There's so many things that science is beginning to help us to understand that dictate how it is that we actually experience the sensory receptors and what they're communicating to our minds. And when it comes to food and rejecting food and pushing away food, a lot of it has to do with this idea of protecting ourselves. That there's something in the signals that our brain is receiving that is saying, maybe this shouldn't be in our body. Maybe we might get sick. Maybe we might get hurt. And that's a good thing, right? That's a normal thing. That's a healthy thing. We want to be able to respond to those things if it is actually true. But sometimes our bodies tell us something that isn't completely accurate.
Mhm.
And the same thing goes in our relationships. There are some times that somebody will rub us the wrong way, that a word or an action or even just a like a visual cue, like the way someone looks at you or at someone else can totally set you off. I know this happens to me. I know this certainly happens in my home and in my family and at work that sometimes things will just trigger this response of fear. It'll put us on edge. And that's to me that's a hunger for connection that's working there.
Mhm.
And that's so much of what's happening in the hearts and minds and the nervous systems of these kiddos, but they don't know how to express it to us in that way.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, so if I'm a foster parent or somebody considering adoption, that I have to remember that the children that may come into my home have potentially not tried what I'm about to serve, or they've had a version of what I'm about to serve, be it the canned beets. By the way, that was the only version of beets, we call them beetroot in England, that I had ever had growing up. If my mom's listening to this, she'll laugh. Um, and so I didn't like them either. But so they may have had a version of what I'm about to serve, and that version wasn't pleasant to them, and it was scary and it was unsafe. And so even if I serve it up differently, it's again, as you said, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take so many tries of new experiences or, just trying a small piece at a time and then taking like the whole plate. And I just love that way of making that connection between food and attachment. It just, to me, it makes it so accessible to to anybody's brain. Like, of course, that would make sense. If I'd only ever grown up eating one thing and then you put a plate of gourmet food in front of me, I'm not going to want to eat that.
Hmm. You're absolutely right. And that, again, it frees up our natural response to respond to those things with shame, with blame, with guilt, with our own feeling of rejection. Not to say that any of those feelings are invalid. Like we still feel those feelings, but it helps us contextualize it in a way that helps us to again, like you were saying at the beginning, to kind of to take a step back and to pause and to understand that there's something else going on here.
Mhm, mhm. Um, you talked a little bit about, you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your this interpersonal neurogastronomy concept. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's the field of study that I'm developing because I'm kind of a unicorn around here. There's not a lot of people that are talking about trauma-informed care in this way. And again, I came into it kind of kicking and screaming myself. But it's this idea that there's so many really amazing things that we are learning about the brain and the body and how the brain and body respond to and react to food through all of the different sensory receptors in our noses, in our mouths, and elsewhere in our bodies, and how that communication that's happening between our brain and our body can inform the way that we understand other realms of relationship. To know that there are aspects of the way that we experience food that we often take for granted as being as understanding, that when we actually look into it a little bit deeper, we learn some really fascinating things about ourselves that can help us to, again, to be more present, to be more attuned, to be more aware of those things that are maybe making it difficult for us to be in relationship with other people. One of the best examples that I've learned recently is this idea that hot foods, like spicy foods, hot peppers and sriracha sauce and things like that. I think we all basically know this, but they're not really hot. Like you can have something that's very cold, like temperature wise, but still express it as hot. And the reason for that is because that's about the closest thing that our brains have to being able to understand what it is when the capsaicin in these spicy foods reacts with the flavor sensory receptors within our mouths. And so it's actually kind of a game that the capsaicin is playing with our brain. Like it thinks that it's hot, it thinks that it's painful, but it's really not. And it's those people that are able to to rise above, to rise above the experience that their mouth is having with this spicy pepper, and to be able to understand this really isn't hot. This really isn't pain that I'm sensing. It's very strong. It's very potent. It's very powerful, but it's not hurting me. It's not
Mm,
hurting me the way my brain is telling me it is.
mm,
And I just had a wave just come over me because that's so much the experience we're having with our kiddos so often. Like it feels like pain what they're doing to me. And for them, it can feel like pain what is happening to them when it isn't.
mm,
And that's part of the joy of trying to establish connection with a disconnected child is to help them realize that the sensations that their body is having while they're real, they're not based in a real understanding of their circumstances. And then we
Mhm.
have an opportunity to rewire their brain through repeated acts of love and of curiosity and compassion to help them experience their life differently. And in so doing, we get to experience our relationship with them differently.
Mhm. I I'm just in awe again because of what a great analogy to use, and just I love your clarification of this idea that it's it's a strong feeling, it's a powerful feeling, and but it's not hot. Like that distinction, and so it's a strong feeling, it's a powerful feeling, but it doesn't have to mean pain. It's just more of a recognition and helping that child's brain to distinguish those experiences and how really, yeah, how powerful that can be. I mean, I know that there's still challenges, it's a concept like that to help a young child understand can be very difficult. If they don't have that kind of fully developed higher level brain functioning, but you can start to set the seeds for it. You can start to, begin just by giving them those different experiences and still maybe even using those words like, I know that you feel something really big right now. Um, but it doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to hurt either one of us. And so again, I'm just like in awe of all of these ways of making this make sense to people through the use of food.
Yeah, the language of hunger can be so very helpful because in those moments when we're not understanding what's going on in ourselves and we're not understanding what's going on in our kiddo, we can take a step back and maybe not in the moment, but maybe after the moment, after the tensions have cooled down a little bit, after we've stopped flipping our lids and are starting to let the endorphins kind of come down, to be able to sit and talk with that child and go through those 4Ds. Like, what was the discomfort? What were you feeling? Where was the pain in your body? Was it here? Was it here? Was it down here? What was the deficiency? What did you feel like you were missing in that moment? What was your body trying to tell you? And why is it that you decided to act or to speak or to behave in that way? Not to trying to find blame and shame and guilt, but to find out where in those realms of relationship was there something that was disconnected that we can help them to walk through and to speak truth and love and compassion into those disconnects so that we can begin to, again, create new neurological pathways, new patterns of attitudes and behaviors so that they can actually get their needs met.
I love that. I love it. um, I I hope that we have a lot of foster and adoptive parents listening, as well as people who are supporting foster and adoptive parents, to be able to, as you say, use that language of food to help with understanding and making it less of a vulnerable space, to take away that blame. Like it's it's not always you. Like it's not you personally. Yes, there are things that you could do different. Like I said, I could serve this up differently for this child. And I have to recognize that, but balancing that with this idea that the child is coming to you with that need and that discomfort, and it's not you personally that it's coming from. It's stemming from those previous experiences that they've had.
Mhm.
And I think that that's empowering for everybody, for the adult, for the child, to be able to say, you know what, I I I can have a choice in this. There is some control over my journey taking a different direction now.
And our kiddos
So
need that. These kiddos need that so much. And I think that's one of the other really big benefits to this idea of hunger is then realizing what an opportunity we have each and every day in this act of enjoying food is to understand that to begin to teach this child how to be soothed is to just make sure that they are fed each and every day, because that is the primary method by which we begin to have this relationship with our own body and understand how to be soothed and that we can be soothed. And then
Mhm.
sitting down to eat with them is that next step of relationship where they begin to be seen, is that you're
Mhm.
eating with them and sometimes, oftentimes, eating the same thing that they are. So it begins to create a connection within them that you are someone who has the same needs that they have and that you are meeting them the same way that they are. The third
Mhm.
level of that is then preparing food for them, which I understand isn't always all that convenient. And we sometimes overlook it as an opportunity to actually demonstrate to these children that this environment in which they are living is safe. It is a
Mhm.
place where the people around them and the place where they are is a place where we work and spend effort and spend money to prepare the things that your body needs, that is going to help you to feel soothed and seen. And then the fourth and highest level of that is actually allowing them into the kitchen with us to prepare that food, because then they are being entrusted, they are being given voice, they're being given choice, and they're being given an opportunity to have that trust put into them, to have their hands on something that you are then going to put into your body as well as they are going to put into theirs.
Mhm.
And that's where the true connection really begins to ratchet up. And
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be much, it doesn't have to be fancy. I've often said that my child, I can let her break apart the broccoli florets and she'll take credit for the entire meal. And that's awesome. That's
Mhm.
great because that takes so much of the pressure off of us as parents to try and and organize or to orchestrate something that is going to help them to connect with us. And sometimes it's just as simple as looking around you at the things you have to do to get supper on the table and think, there's got to be something in here that I don't have to do. There's
Mhm.
something that they can do for me, or better yet, with me, so that they can feel the same trust that other people are placing in you to prepare and serve food to them.
Mm. I'm thinking about as if I am a parent listening and I'm thinking, well, I have a child in my care and they only want to eat one thing, whatever that one thing might be. Sometimes it can be unhealthy. So, as a caregiver, I'm thinking about those four steps that you described, and I'm thinking, I would like for them to try something more healthy at some point, not right away. How might you address that? How might you approach that using those steps of, the soothing and safe and secure? Like,
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a question I get a lot. I would say there's a couple of different things. First of all, using those four Ds to help and to try and understand maybe what is it about that food that
mm,
they really like, that they really enjoy? How does it make them feel? Or perhaps when they're experiencing or being presented with foods that they don't really like, what is it about it? Is it the color, the texture, the flavor, the taste? Kiddos in care are often highly sensory, and they're
mhm,
highly not necessarily attuned to their senses, but they feel things really strongly. So we might be able to actually get some information from them about that. So being curious about what's going on with them and helping them to kind of process through what it is they're actually experiencing, and then being curious about the things that actually do interest them, whether it be food related or otherwise, and finding ways of giving them voice and choice and influence on what it is that you're actually going to be, eating for breakfast or lunch or dinner, whatever it happens to be. And of course, allowing them to take part in the process. You'd be surprised how much influence that can have when a child has had even the most minuscule part in making that particular meal, the amount of vested interest it places into that child to want to then eat the food that they've prepared. Because if you prepared something and you don't want to eat it yourself, that's kind of saying something, right? And so
mhm.
finding opportunities to involve them in the process, whether it be in the choosing of the ingredients and the shopping of the ingredients and the cleaning of the ingredients or the actual preparation, can help them to feel more safe, to feel more secure, to not be as vigilant
Mm.
in their autonomic nervous system, to then be in that emotional presence, to be a little bit more open to trying new things. Again, it may still take some reps, but doing those practices will help to put them into that social emotional place where they might actually be open to trying something new.
Mhm. Well, and yeah, you've just said what I was thinking, that it may still take some repetitions, because I just in my head, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've tried all of those things and they still don't want to try the food. And at that point, we have to let go of our own stuff. Like, it's not about the kid then, it's about us, and just being okay with the fact that they were involved in all of these other steps. Like, the fact that they want to be involved in that is a huge step for so many of our kids. And so being okay with saying, I yeah, it'd be great if you try it, but it's okay if you don't today. Maybe you will next time. Um, and highlighting what you've said is that, I can't wait to try this wonderful food that you've made for us, and it smells delicious. And if my child is sitting here and they say, I want a PB&J sandwich, that's okay. I'm still going to enjoy this wonderful food, and you can enjoy your sandwich. And next time, maybe you'll like to try it. And I mean, even even I struggle with that. I think it's okay for us to say that's hard. You talked about it earlier. It's kind of that feeling of rejection. Like, I made you something, or we did something together and it was so good, and now you're turning around and rejecting it, and how that feels for us. It's a big feeling for us as adults to put aside.
Mhm.
Um, but I love all those ideas, and just being able to involve that child in that whole process where they feel comfortable being. So, well, Chef, I just want to thank you for this conversation. I want to thank you for bringing this movement like out into the open. I know that our listeners can go check out your website and chefkibby.com, and we will also be posting that with the podcast, so they'll be able to access that. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your journey as a parent, uh, foster, adoptive, biological. You are a parent, in my mind, and maybe we'll have you on again sometime.
I would certainly love that. Thank you so much for allowing me to have this time with you. I've really enjoyed our conversation and the opportunity to share my heart with your listeners.